A whole new world. Robert Queen. Only because she's known you for so long, Jasmine said with a smile, giving his hand a squeeze. We saw something, Aladdin said reluctantly, not wanting to break her mood. Jafar is now having people line up for bread and swear allegiance or loyalty or whatever to get it. He's not just handing it out anymore. Things are taking an unsettling turn. What? And the whole wanting to create an army of the undead thing isn't unsettling? No, that's horrific, but it's so horrific it's like it's unreal. But these were normal people. This suddenly afraid the free food they had just gotten used to was being taken away. I can't speak to genies and ghouls and ancient books of magic. I don't like what Jafar is turning the people of Agrabah into. He killed my father in front of me. In front of the people of Agrabah, Jasmine reminded him with gritted teeth. There is nothing he is incapable of. They came to the main room of the headquarters, the one with the tables and braziers. A guard stood next to the chest of pilfered items, the girl in the blue from the heist. Now she wore trousers and a long dagger slung on either hip. Thank you, Parisa, Jasmine said with a warm smile. We'll take it from here. You deserve a break after everything you've done today already. Of course, Jasmine, the girl said with a bow before she left. Aladdin opened the chest and carefully took out the musty leather-bound books. There was still a relatively novel concept for him. He was more used to scrolls or notes written in shards of dried clay. There's an imam from the old quarter named Carrasco, very learned, who said he would help us with any translations as soon as he could slip away, Jasmine said. They sat down on the low table, not clear of food except for a pitcher of mint tea and a plate of flatbread. They put the stack of books between them, and each chose one. Aladdin opened his, a treatise on the limits of magic, then quickly traded out the giant text-only volume for Spellbreaker, a compendium, which had pictures and recipes for charms. After a few minutes, Jasmine put hers down in disappointment. I don't think any of these are Al-Azif. I can't be sure about these two because of the languages. That looks like Queniforum, which is just mad, and that's Heretic Egyptian, which I definitely cannot read, but they seem to be much lighter subjects. If the illustrations mean anything, we need the imam. But on the other hand, do you want to protect your sheep against hoof fungus? Aladdin asked brightly. He turned the book so he could see the ancient, brightly illuminated picture and recipes that he'd been looking at. Because if you do, I've got a charm for you. Jasmine smiled. I wonder if it works. Aladdin put his book aside. So what is this Al-Azif all about anyway? I guess it's a record of some ancient madman's travels to forbidden and dark worlds. He wrote down the knowledge he gained there about channeling powers from beyond the universe himself. Somehow, this very act of recording it became the conduit of that power. Aladdin blinked at her. Just possessing it lets you kill with your mind and raise armies of the undead? Jasmine re-explained, rolling her eyes. Oh, I get it now. Bad stuff. So, what do we do when we get it? Aladdin asked, putting his book down. Burn it or something? Burn it? Jasmine said in shock. A tome of what importance? No, we can't do that. We have to keep it for ourselves. What? Aladdin said slowly. Just think, in it lies the power to break the laws of magic. What else could it do? Nothing. Nothing good, Aladdin said firmly. It could give me the power I need to defeat Jafar and take back the throne. We're working on that. Here, Aladdin said gently, reaching out to touch her knee. With people who believe in you and your cause. With children and thieves and beggars and tigers and genies. We can do it without any extra magic. Jasmine looked doubtful. More strength, more weapons couldn't hurt. Oh, yes, they could. When the weapons are evil, and just because the book is in our hands doesn't mean it couldn't wind up in someone else's hands. We need to burn it. That keeps it from ever being used for ill purposes. That's a dumb reason to destroy it, because it might do damage someday, when we could use its magic to fix everything, Jasmine yelled. You know who believed in that magic could fix everything? Aladdin yelled back. My mother. All of these stories about Madrids and jinns and Horuses and whatever granting wishes and fixing all your problems with a snap of your fingers. Every single one ended happily ever after, just like she believed my dad was going off to find some magical thing or job or whatever he could save our family. Magic doesn't do that. Nothing does it, and you are as crazy as my mother if you think otherwise. I could bring back my father with it. Jasmine said it quietly in a small voice. She wasn't looking at Aladdin or the books anymore. She was staring off into space with eyes that were suddenly wet. Aladdin immediately felt his anger melt away. Like a sandcastle in the desert wind, she looked so tiny sitting there. Not a robber queen or a sultana at all. He scooted over next to her and wrapped her in his arms. Hey, he said, quietly kissing her on the cheek. I know you miss him. I miss my mom too, despite all those things I just said, but you can't bring your father back. He wouldn't be the same. He wouldn't want it. You don't know that, Jasmine said, sniffling. Are you willing to find that out the hard way? He's gone, Jasmine. Let him go. Jasmine held Aladdin tightly for a moment, squeezing him harder than he'd thought possible for a girl her size. Then she sat back and tried to compose herself, wiping her nose. This is all because of my father in some way, isn't it? She finally said. If he hadn't brought Agrabah to the place where it is now, with a huge population of incredibly poor people and an even huger disparity between them and the wealthy nobles like us, there wouldn't have been an opening for someone like Jafar. No one would have supported him if the Sultan had done right by his people. Aladdin really wanted to tell her it wasn't true, but he couldn't. She saw the pitying look on his face and smiled wanly. I've learned a lot of hard truths about him and my whole world lately. I think maybe, in the back of my mind, I always knew. In the history books I read, great rulers didn't spend all of their time playing with children's toys, and they didn't let their advisors handle everything. They kept an eye on their people and had a hand in the day-to-day running. The great ones, that is, even military leaders like Xerxes. They didn't just let ordinary people go hungry for no reason. Ordinary people like you. Aladdin guessed what was coming next. He focused on his piece of flatbread, carefully breaking it in half. What happened to your family? With your mother? She asked hesitantly. What made you turn to a life of thievery? Aladdin sighed and put his bread back down on his plate. His usual glibness drained away under her scrutiny. Actually, a lot of his joking and irresponsible monkeying had disappeared in the last 2 weeks. He wasn't sure if he missed it or not. My father, Cassim, left us when I was very young. I barely remember him. Aladdin hadn't mentioned his father's name aloud in years. He half hoped he wouldn't be able to remember it, but it rose perfectly formed from the depths of his mind, immediate and whole, just waiting to be brought to the surface again with all of his accompanying pain. Imagine someone just like me, he continued. Imagine an independent, roguishly handsome young man, quick with a laugh and a joke, slow to find honest work. Imagine, me, with no thought for any other person, no thought beyond the moment's fun, but with 2 people to be responsible for. When it got too much, he just left. And my mom, she was a great mom, he said forcefully, looking into Jasmine's eyes. She could make soup out of dust and a drop of water. She could make clothing, decent clothing, from scraps she begged from people who only slightly less poor from us. She kept our nasty little house spotlessly clean and as cheery as she could. She sounds like an amazing person, Jasmine said gently. Yeah, but... Aladdin sighed again, his defensiveness gone. Like I said, she was completely deluded, insane and irresponsible in her own way. Another woman would have had people hunt her wayward husband down and bring him back. Another woman would have had him declared dead and found herself another husband, a better man, but she truly believed, until the day she died, that Cassim would come back, that one day he would return and whisk us to a fabulous new life, with a nicer house and servants, and he would stay at home and be the father and husband our family needed. She looked up at Jasmine. She had a look of such compassion and sadness. Aladdin had the urge to reach over and comfort her. She died young, of course, Aladdin finished. There was no other way to put it. No nice way. She was overworked and came down with a wasting disease. It was one of the other things that drove me apart from Morgiana and Dubon and everyone. Street rats take care of each other, my mother always says. But no one took care of us. Maruf tried to help out a little, But by the point his leg no longer worked and he was scraping for food himself, and my friends were too busy putting together their life network of thieves and beggars to spend much time helping me or comforting my mother. Well, I guess that's not fair, he said, breaking his pieces of bread into smaller pieces. Everyone's got something, like they say. Everyone had someone starving, sick, or dying. Morgiana's parents would spend any money they got on wine. Dubon's dad was lame, and his older sister was married to a man who beat her. Good God, Jasmine murmured. I had no idea. Yeah, it's all bad. It's the quarter of the street rats, remember? Anyway, from the day my mother died, I decided I would never rely on anyone else for food or shelter, or to fulfill my dreams for me, and that someday I would be rich and live in the palace and all my troubles would be over. You dreamed of living in the palace? Jasmine asked with a curious smile. Our house had a view of it, out the back, Aladdin said with a weak grin. I used to gaze at it and dream. It looked like paradise, golden and white in the sunlight, stark and imposing in a dust storm, lit up by 1,000 lamps in the middle of the night, and then when I moved out, after my mom died, I chose my hideout because it had a similar view. In all those years, Jasmine mused, I languished in my beautiful gardens and looked out the windows at night at Agrabah laid out below me, and I wished I could be there. I wonder if our thoughts ever crossed, like stray breezes. Or a prayer of swallows. Aladdin made his fingers dance round each other in the air. But wealth isn't a magic lamp that suddenly erases all your problems, Jasmine said slowly, breaking off a piece of bread for herself. Imagine being a large bird in a tiny but golden cage. If it weren't for the death of my father, I'd be happier now than I'd ever been. I'm free here. Having the freedom to choose is better than having everything you want. You'd better convince the people of Agrabah that, Aladdin said wryly. Otherwise, they'll never back you. So far, they seem to prefer full bellies and no choice. When I am Sultana, they shall have both, Jasmine vowed. I will figure out how to feed the people and keep them free. They shall go to school, all of the children, no matter what religion, no matter what class, boys and girls. They shall be given every opportunity to do whatever they wish when they grow up, and not be forced to thieve and beg. This I swear. Her eyes were distant, looking at some future sight, a world of her own building. Aladdin had no doubt that she would achieve that vision or die trying. She made him believe that it was actually possible. That kind of paradise on earth would be possible. And he was willing to do whatever it took to help her with that dream. I believe you, he whispered. I believe in you. He never would have dared to kiss the royal Princess Jasmine, but it turned out he didn't need to. The royal Princess Jasmine leaned over and kissed him. Her skin was warm and smelled of sand and mint. Aladdin melted into the kiss like his whole body had been waiting for it, and he didn't even know it himself. She put her hands around his neck and drew him in closer. One of her hands worked up into his hair, and another into his shoulder, with a need he hadn't realized she felt. So I guess we're done fighting, Aladdin whispered. The royal princess tweaked him on the nose.